Is It About the Weather? A weekly podcast where we explore the many ways in which weather intertwines itself into our lives. I'm your host, Mark Jelanic, and this week we're going to be talking about my watch. And you're just going to have to wait and see what in the world that has to do with the weather. But I promise you it does. I swear. Well, we'll at least make the link anyways. And no, it's not because it can tell the temperature. None of that, nothing. That's a little more nuanced than that, yet interesting at the same time, hopefully. But before we jump into the main topic, as always, let's do a check on things about weather and some other weather-related items. I don't know about you this week. My week's been weather weird, if you will. And you know, I knew it was going to be one of those weeks when I looked at, like I went to weather.gov and I looked at the maps for the week ahead. And where I was, there was just green blobs every single day. Not definitive things, no frontal boundaries, no clear delineations of weather coming and going, but just green blobs. And if you go to another site, it would show you a 50% chance of rain every day, 50%, 50%, or something in that area. And there's nothing to me more annoying than that kind of forecast, because you know what's going on. It's just summertime, hit and miss. You're in the setup, and that's what I watched happen this week. I was trying to plan to do a couple bike rides, even a hike, and every time the weather was like right there. And so sometimes the weather would really cooperate and stay right there, but you didn't know it was going to stay right there. You thought, well, maybe it's going to drift a little. Because other times, other weather in the area was drifting, and it was really just annoying. And so today when I was going to get a final ride in before I pack things up and head on out, nope, wasn't going to be. Rain came in and stayed. Wasn't supposed to. That time it was really not. It was supposed to end a little earlier, but we adjust, don't we? I enjoyed the rain. Some good thunderstorms, some nice downpours, something I always enjoy, but can be at times a little difficult to plan around. But alas, next week I'm sure there'll be no rain, and I'll be wishing there was some. A couple weeks ago I brought up Ted Fujita. We were talking about him in the context of airplanes and about airplane safety and his discoveries of downdrafts and what we've learned. And I also mentioned at that time that there had been a special on PBS about him. The show is American Experience, I think, and it's not one I was familiar with, but I kind of dug it up, found it online. And for those of you who support in any way your local public broadcasting system channel, they have different fundraising throughout the year. You usually get access to their online streaming. Some of the stuff's readily available, so I'm not sure which of these things it falls into, if it's you have to be a subscriber or a supporter, or if it's just readily available. But I highly recommend it. It was a good special about him. It was focused on tornadoes, like I think I mentioned it. The title suggested that, but it did cover the topic we talked about. And it was an interesting perspective. I wasn't really sure. A lot of times you get those things and maybe you just don't follow it, but it was an interesting human story as well. So I highly recommend it. Maybe something to go check out. My last thing, I'm going to get on my soapbox. You guys know I like to do this every so often. When people just seem dumb when it comes to weather, like when I'm outside and I'm going to go, for example, today was going to go outside, knew it was raining, knew there was a chance of thunderstorms, had a sense of what the risk was, but at least I knew that going in, and I knew what was going on around me. But recently, and I just don't understand it, went to do it, and it was one, I'd mentioned the weekend where I had done a little bit of storm chasing, if you will. But I came back the next day, and there were some storms coming in where I'm living. And so I actually went out to watch them. So I'm out on the kind of this balcony patio area that is the upper floor of the building, where there's also like places for people to grill and tables to sit out at. And with COVID going on, that There's tends to be not as many people out there currently, but there are a couple families that are up there quite often. It's great for them, right? They've got kids. Kids are getting kind of antsy being in an apartment all the time. I get it. But it wasn't a new forecast that it was a good chance of rain in the afternoon. It had been forecasted for a few days. And I'm always amazed when, I'm looking at this table, a couple of adults, maybe 3 or 4 adults, a couple groups of kids. So you're dealing with kids already, fairly young, and storms are obviously coming in. I mean, all you got to do is look. Just open your eyes, and they're bringing food out like they're going to sit down and have a picnic. Okay, it's fine. It's their choice. They're willing to do that. What am I going to say? But I'm watching them. It's like, and it hits me. They've all 4 of them have phones, 3 or 4, whatever it was. And even there was another person out on the deck who was kind of talking to the kids and talking about how he's going to make it windy and stuff, and was doing stuff, and the kids were all having fun. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, most people know that these types of winds really only come with storms. So what are you people doing? I mean, I'm under the awning because I know what's coming. And they're just sitting there unpacking the food. It wasn't like they were finishing up. They were unpacking the food. And then the next thing you know, the storms come in, the kids are screaming and crying and all this stuff. I'm like, didn't you even look at your phone today? You would have known that the last place you should have been planning to be this evening was out on the deck. If you were planning to try to keep dry, that is. This times baffles me. All this great technology we have available to us, and people still do that. Well, maybe someday they'll learn. Maybe they won't. I mean, I guess we all do those things from time to time. Maybe I shouldn't be so critical. But it seemed to me they could have avoided getting drenched, and it was a soaker. Definitely a soaker, had they spent a few minutes planning ahead. All right. Well, soapbox put away. Time to get on to the main topic. So why are we talking about my watch? Why in the world on a weather-related podcast are we talking about my watch? And as I said, those of you who know me, I've mentioned before, and this is not my first watch that has the ability to measure temperature, the ability to measure pressure. So is that what we're talking about? Well, maybe, but not really. We're talking about something in my watch that's been driving me crazy lately. It's been acting funny. And I had no real clue as to what was driving the specific problem. But I did know how weather was related to it. And so I thought I'd share that with you guys and talk about how measuring weather is important sometimes in other ways. Of course, it's all the techie angles and the stuff we always hit with me. But when weather and tech gets, muddled together, of course I'm going to get into the middle of it. So the real thing I was trying to measure, or that my watch has not been doing properly lately, is altitude. And this all started, I don't know, probably a little over a month, maybe a month and a half ago. Went out for a bike ride. And, I get back and, I'm looking at the data for the ride, and it showed that the starting altitude was like 400 feet. And it finished at about 40 feet, let's say. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something along those lines. But the reality is it should have been either 400 and 400 or 40 and 40. And no, I wasn't missing a digit. Let's say it's 450, just so we don't think that I'm dismissed a zero somewhere, because you could see it on the plot. Very different altitude starting, very different altitude finishing, yet I started at exactly the same spot where my car was, unless I'm in some sort of parallel universe where the elevation of the Earth is slightly askew. But I don't think that's really the case. I don't remember going through any wormholes when I was driving or feeling I lost time or anything. So it got me, you have the ability to go in and my watch has the ability to go in and get altitude updated. You can calibrate it a couple of ways. So, maybe it was just a calibration issue. Calibrate it two ways. One is to just enter a number, right? If you know precisely the elevation you had, you can type that in. Or you can let GPS do it. So I tried calibrating it, yet again and again, things were, I would go to, a certain location, and it was working sometimes, the value seemed right, and then other times completely wrong. But why? Why might that be? And again, what does altitude have to do with weather? Well, it's really simple. It all has to do with the primary way around the globe in which we calculate elevation particularly when we're not on the surface of the planet or when elevation is changing, right? So we have all sorts of maps, clearly, right, that tell us what the elevation is at any given point. And, some countries or some areas may have a more detailed map than others, but we generally have that information available to us. So, maps are always a good starting point. And you heard me mention GPS. With all these satellites in the air now, can't we use that? Well, you can. You can. GPS, anybody who uses it kind of knows this, but maybe if you're not familiar, to get your position on a 2D plane, so on a set surface, you need 3 satellites, because you've got to be able to track your movement and to triangulate, and you've heard that term, and that's kind of where it comes from. To triangulate a position, you need 3 to 1. Okay, to find you, I've got to kind of be able to look at you on both axes, whether you're moving X or Y. And to do that, I need a 3rd satellite so that I can pinpoint your location. But to add elevation in the mix, it's always best to think of it for the number of dimensions you need to go +1. So when we're measuring in 2-dimensional space, we need 3 satellites. When we're measuring in 3-dimensional space, so when we're going up and down and adding that into the mix, I got to have 4 satellites. And yeah, there's a fair amount of GPS satellites up there, and usually you can get a fix if you've got clear enough location, but it gets tricky. It's already hard enough to kind of do you in a 3D plan, but it gets even more difficult to go up and down because the sensitivity of the up and down is a bit more tricky. And we've also got a thing with GPS, and anybody who's used it before knows, it's not like it's pinpointing you to, a foot or 2 away. In the old days it was because they intentionally made the satellites miss, but there's enough delays in the signals bouncing back and forth to you and to the, from the satellites. And anytime, you've got trees around or buildings around or anything that might block the signal at all that kind of messes with it. So they tell you realistically to expect anywhere from a 25 to 50 foot variance. And if any of you've ever loaded, you can load an app on your smartphone that gives you precise coordinates. Yeah, you can pull it off a mapping program, but you can get an app specifically that tells you where you are. And if you ever look at it, most of them will have an accuracy measure. It'll say within so many feet, right? It'll tell you how accurate it is. And when you're traveling it, on a map at 60 miles an hour, as long as you're within a few feet either way, it's usually okay. So it's not something to worry about. And over time, we've also tried other things. It's obvious. One that comes to mind is radars, or like radar detectors. It's how police know how fast you're going, right? So clearly they need to have an ability to precisely pinpoint your position. And they're fairly accurate when you're close. Further away, you've got challenges, but more or less, you can use radar, whether you're at ground level or above ground, to get a good gauge of your position. But it's not very convenient for everybody to carry radar around, is it? Well, I'm not going to have, well, maybe someday I'll have that on my watch, I don't know. And in the past, it was even like World War II, there was attempts done with sonic waves. And not much different than radar. It's a way to measure distance, and it was pretty effective. But there's one that we've settled on, and one that's used, we've been talking about aviation on a few different episodes, consistently in aviation. But it's also the one primarily used by most watches that tell you your elevation. So the altimeter, if you will, is using barometric pressure. So my watch has pressure measurement mixed in, just like most of our smartphones do, actually. And it's in measuring air pressure, so in measuring a fundamental element of weather, that you actually get your altitude. So what was going on? It's pretty simple. I mean, I have a little port on the side of my watch, and in that port is a sensor that has a good sense of how much atmospheric pressure there is. And so, I mean, the best way to think of it, and maybe you've heard different terms over time. Inches of mercury is a number that's used, and actually that one still is used in aviation. It's not the standard units, but it has to do really with a column of mercury and how much pressure it's exerting. All right? But when we're measuring pressure, that's really what we're doing. We're looking up in the atmosphere and saying, for my spot, how much does the column of air above me weigh? And inside my watch, or inside any altimeter that uses this type of technology, there's some disc that can compress or expand. So as the weather gets higher pressure, it pushes it down, and little gears in a analog type system, not a digital system, will turn, and the knob will turn, and it'll tell you what your altitude is. It'll change it. And vice versa. When the pressure lowers, those discs expand instead of being compressed, and those gears rotate the other way. And again, or we imitate that in a digital sense. Now, you may have also heard of millibars of pressure, or hectopascals. They're essentially the same thing. These are the standard units, and they're used more commonly in the metric system, but they become more commonplace in the U.S., and they tend to be used on weather maps. So maybe you've seen them where you heard about 1,000 millibars of pressure or something like that, or 980. It really doesn't matter. But the long and short of it is, for each one of these little millibars, it's equivalent to about 8.3 meters, roughly in that range, and 27 or so feet. So just one of those. So if you go from 1,000 millibars to 1,001, it's that much elevation change, or so it's thinking. So when you think about weather moving around, right? And let's say you go from a nice high pressure day to a front moving through and a low pressure system moving in, you may change 20 millibars. Well, you start doing the math on that, and you could have stayed in the building you're in, and the weather could have changed that much, and you start to realize, oh, well, that's not good. Is that what's going on? Is it weather changes that are driving, on that given day, as an example, the pressure to be off, because what it was calibrated to was a specific pressure and an elevation from a prior point in time. And while that fixed point may be right, and it might even be right using GPS to work it out, if the weather's changing, it might be going up and down and driving change. So it's a fairly sensitive measure, and it is relatively easy to track the changes, and it's used by essentially planes all over the world. So you start thinking about that, and you go, pilots use it. Getting the height in the plane. Well, you just told me how, weather moving through might change that. So how do the pilots adjust that? Well, simply they calibrate their altimeter every time they're coming in, specifically to come in and land. A lot of them do it takeoff at a given location, just to have it updated for the beginning of the flight as well. But what happens at most airports is there's a weather station. I mean, that's where a lot of them are around the globe. And that information is usually broadcast. It can be a few ways. It can be air traffic control gives it to you, but a lot of them have, it's just, radio frequency that sends out the information. And they take that data, particularly, like I said, when they're coming in to land, and they say, okay, my thing says I'm at, 18,000 feet, and I'm going to adjust that to, 17,700 or whatever it is, based on what the station pressure is where I'm at. So you would hope that most pilots would do that. Most tend to do that. But there are cases where they haven't done it, and I found an article about one where a pilot didn't adjust or used an airport on the way close to where he was going, but he was going to a coastal area where pressures can be very different in this vicinity, and he bounced the plane off the ocean. Now, it does appear he survives a smaller plane, but it stresses the importance, because basically they were low, he had a passenger with him. It may have been I didn't get for sure on this in the story, but somebody sitting next to him, so I'm not sure if it was another pilot or truly just a very small plane and his passenger happened to be in the opposing seat. But they came through some low clouds, and when they came out of the clouds, they were essentially on the ocean. Cartwheeled the plane into the ocean. Not a good thing. Not something you're looking to do, but it does happen, and that's why it's so important. Not important at 36,000 feet or whatever cruising altitude is to be off 100 feet here or there, because air traffic control knows enough that as they're working with planes, that level of sensitivity, as planes are moving through different weather regimes, they've just got to be close enough. It's when landing comes into place that it really matters. So what about my watch, right? Is it working properly? No. That wasn't the problem. It appears to be trickier than that, because, most of the times when I'm going on these rides, I'm usually going with somebody, or I also do track it on my phone. And again, the pressure on my phone, I've watched it. It's not always 100% accurate, but it holds a pattern. So if I generally start around a certain level and come back to the same point, it knows how to adjust for that. And other people's watches or measuring devices were showing a symmetric track, if you will, of elevation changes. So either mine is just wacky, and I've got to accept the fact that it's being overly sensitive to changes in the weather, even though I didn't, there are times when it clearly hasn't changed that much, or there's something else going on. But the long and the short of it is, if I didn't know what might be driving some of these things, and if I wasn't comparing with someone else, I probably wouldn't care. But if my watch was close enough to the standard levels, I probably also wouldn't care. In the meantime, it's going to drive me crazy. But for me to get the forecast right on my watch of elevation, it needs to be able to understand the forecast for pressure to some extent. So maybe it won't ever be right. And maybe I'm expecting something that's just plain impossible. We'll see. I got to get in touch with Garmin technical support and see what they tell me. Just hope it's something that doesn't drive me crazy. Those are the little things that tend to drive me nuts, because I want things to be the way I think they should be, especially if everybody else's is working right. All right. An interesting side note, by the way. Side note on this is, for all this up, I talked about the column of air, essentially the top of the atmosphere, tens of thousands of feet, if you will, because most of the pressure is in the bottom part of the atmosphere. But did you know that you only have to go 10 meters down in the ocean? So, 35 feet or so, a little less than that. And when you do that, you equal the equivalent pressure of all the air that was above the same spot. So just keep that in mind. Now you'll understand when divers deal with weird pressure sicknesses when they come up from significantly larger depths, of what might be going on. Decompressing, after their body has been pushed so hard. It's a bit tricky. Got to be safe with that. I also brought up, it reminded me when I was thinking about putting this episode together, I was talking about the gaps of airplanes missing. And I saw an interesting story this week about satellites. You know, we're talking about how that helps complement satellites, but a new set of satellites. There's a company, I think I may have mentioned them on a past episode, called Spire. I know I mentioned it in the class I taught when I was teaching radar and satellite meteorology. And they launch satellites that aren't specifically designed to track weather, but they're tiny little things, about the size of a loaf of bread. And they go up in the atmosphere, and kind of like we've talked about with some other newer technologies, the purpose isn't necessarily to track weather, but the type of information they are tracking can tell us a lot about weather components. And so it's possible that these little satellites, and they've signed a contract, I think, with both the European group and one here in America that does the modeling, to start ingesting this data. So maybe that's a way, if planes don't get back to normal soon, that we can start looking for alternative ways to fill that data void. But as I mentioned, it's not a direct measurement. It is closer than some of our standard satellites in terms of its low Earth orbit, but it's still an indirect measurement, if you will. So we'll see if they help. I'll put a link about that in the show notes if you're interested in looking at it. You can go take a look. All right. Well, it's time to let you guys go. As always, feel free to reach out to me. whatisabouttheweather@gmail.com. If you have thoughts or ideas, or just any sort of comments, don't ever hesitate. Questions any type. Be glad to answer those. Or just interact. Had some interesting conversations with you listeners over the years, so always enjoy that. But for now, you can find us, of course, on Twitter as well. What is it about the weather? It's WIIATW. What is it about the weather? On Twitter. Or you can catch me, Mark_Jelinek. That's JELINEK. On Twitter as well. So until next time, may your weather be interesting and enjoyable. And as always, think about it from a different light. Maybe think about the weather when you're not thinking about the weather. Because as we all know, there's much more to weather than the weather itself.